lot of individuals in math, I'm going to say black and white alike, who then see black mathematicians and instantly think they couldn't possibly be as good as, or they couldn't possibly create their own mathematics, or that if we do want to have someone go off to graduate school, we need to have bridge programs. We need to start them at a lower level.
Shine bright like a diamond. Shine bright like a diamond.
Hello everyone, my name is Marian and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a very special guest with us to talk about increasing diversity in academia. The current Black Lives Matter movement has not only shone light on police brutality against Black Americans, but it has also had the academic world talking about inclusivity, particularly in STEM. Today we will have a conversation with a special guest about just that, increasing diversity in STEM, particularly in mathematics. We are joined by Edray Herber Goins, who is a professor of mathematics at Pomona College. He graduated from CalTech, where he double majored in mathematics and physics and received 2 prizes for mathematics. Professor Goins then went on to complete his PhD on elliptic curves and icosahedral Galois representations at Stanford University under Daniel Bump and Karl Rubin. He has worked as a professor at both Harvard and the National Security Agency and has taught at both Caltech and Purdue. Professor Goins has published over 20 journal articles in areas such as applied mathematics, graph theory, number theory, and representation theory, and on topics such as Diophantine equations, elliptic curves, and African Americans in mathematics. He has acted as a referee for 20 different journals in mathematics, served on dozens of panels for the National Science Foundation, and has given more than 150 invited addresses on his research. Professor Goins, it is a pleasure to have this timely and essential conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. So let's just jump right into it. Prior to you going off to Caltech for college, what were some pivotal moments that drew you into STEM, particularly math and physics?
I think, ironically, growing up near the Los Angeles International Airport was probably one of the biggest factors. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and it was just myself and my brother being raised by a single mom. So I can't say that I grew up in any kind of fancy household where we went to private schools or anything to this effect, but we did grow up very near to Inglewood, California. That meant that every day, looking out of the kitchen window, I would see the airplanes either taking off from LAX or landing at LAX. And I remember being very young, probably 5 years old, wondering, how do those things stay up in the air? How do these things work? So from a very early age, I was really interested in science, and more generally, I was interested in how the world around me worked. I remember trying to convince my mom that the University of Southern California, USC, which was about 10 minutes away from where I grew up, used to have programs in the summer where they would have elementary school kids to take classes in things like amphibians, about frogs, or it might be about rockets, learning about model rockets and how those worked. It wasn't really anything in mathematics. These were all science courses that you could take to learn more about the world around you. And I used to love taking those classes at USC. So by the time I got to high school, I was very much interested in science, and more particularly, I was interested in physics. But I was not interested in mathematics. I actually thought mathematics was kind of a waste of time, but at the time, I didn't know what a mathematician did. I didn't know really what mathematics was, but I knew what a physicist did. You know, I certainly knew about airplanes, I knew about rockets, I had heard about black holes. And when I was a senior, there were 2 books in particular that really caught my interest. One was by Benoit Mandelbrot about this concept of chaos. I think that the title of the book literally was Chaos. And I was really interested to learn about what this was. Another was by Stephen Hawking, and the book was A Brief History in Time. And that really caught my interest in learning more about how the universe worked. It wasn't so much now about things that I could see, it was about things that I couldn't see. So really with those 2 books that I spent a lot of time reading in my senior year, it was definitely a given that I was going to have a career in the STEM fields.
So now let's go back to your CalTech experience. So you have this interest in STEM, you get into CalTech. And when you get into CalTech, you're one of the few African Americans in your class. How did that shape your experience? What were people's reactions to you at CalTech?
We actually came in at a very pivotal time. I started at Caltech in 1990, and several things happened that year. There was an individual named Lee Brown who did recruiting for Caltech for its Black students at that point for around 20, 25 years or so. I think he had started at Caltech in 1967, 1969. But that was the year he was retiring. So he decided that he was going to go out with a big bang. You know, Caltech at the time was bringing in around 180 freshmen to the freshman class every year. Up to that point, the number of Black students was around maybe 3 to 5. So imagine 3 to 5 Black students coming in out of a freshman class of just under 200. Well, the year that Lee Brown retired, he worked with the admissions office to admit 14 of us. So there were 14 Black students that came in 1990. That was the largest number that had come in at least 10 years or so. So unfortunately, it was bittersweet. He did make it a point that the 14 of us got in, and we all got there to campus in fall of 1990. But one of the last things Lee Brown did was the typical thing that he actually did every summer, which is he looked around at the 14 of us that were there, the 14 Black students, and he warned us, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you will be here at the end of 4 years. The sad thing is, he was completely right. Of the 14 of us, only I think 3 of us graduated after 4 years, and only a total of 5 had graduated after 5 years. The other 9 or 10 or so had all dropped out. So he was completely right that the Caltech was that difficult of a place. So I say all of this to say that coming in my freshman year, we knew that on the one hand, that was the largest class of Black students that Caltech had seen in at least a decade. But on the other hand, we knew chances were it was going to be very difficult for most of us to graduate. So we were really met with kind of a bittersweet type of idea when we got there to campus. A lot of people were very happy that the numbers were so large, but a lot of people also knew that the chances of us graduating were slim to none. It was going to be very difficult for all of us to finish. I think that philosophy, knowing that 2/3 of the Black students were going to drop out, is what drove me to really work hard to create a community of Black students at Caltech. Yes, we did experience a lot of very awkward interactions with students and faculty alike. In 1992, just a couple of years after I was there at Caltech, the LA uprising had happened, the LA riots. And I can tell you that a lot of students were very scared for themselves being there at Caltech. They thought the world was ending, people were going to come and burn down the campus, all of these silly things. But of course, the riots were taking place a good 15, 20 miles away from campus. None of this was ever going to affect Pasadena. But I still remember to this day being in classes and hearing my white students tell me that they were upset that all of this was happening. They were scared for themselves, but they also felt that those people needed to get their acts together, that those people that were burning down their own neighborhoods were being irrational. And now remember, they're saying this about folks in Los Angeles. I was from South Central LA. So they were talking about me and the people that I grew up with. So it was a very frustrating time at times there at Caltech, but I could also see that because we had such a large class of Black students, that we could really make a difference, that this will be one of the largest graduating classes of Black students that Caltech had seen in a long, long time. So I was very happy to be there in the time that I was.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, I was reading somewhere that when you came into Caltech, you felt like the students there had math. They had seen math far beyond your level. But not only did you work hard to catch up, it's fair to say that you exceeded, because when you graduated from Caltech with 2 majors, math and physics, you also received 2 prizes in mathematics. Would you like to talk more about this experience?
I would. When I started at Caltech, I really had only seen 1 year of calculus. I actually joke with people that I was very much behind when I was in high school. Most of my friends in high school were taking calculus in their junior year. It's just that they didn't want to continue with the second year of calculus in their senior year. I was actually taking trigonometry in my junior year, and I felt that I was already going to be very behind in taking calculus in my senior year. But it was one of my teachers, Michael Seminoff, who actually said, I'd be willing to teach you first year calculus and second year calculus, but there's a catch. You have to be willing to write up the solution sets to all of the AP exams from calculus AB. So the way I learned calculus was I worked with him, just doing a few lectures every day, but then I had to write up all of the solutions to all of the free response questions from the AP calculus course. This was for the students that wanted to take AP calculus that year that I was taking AP calculus. But as part of this deal, I was then learning first year and second year at the same time. So that's really what cemented my love of mathematics. I never would be willing to tell people that because, of course, I wanted to be a physicist. I was learning calculus because I wanted to learn more about physics and how do you explain ideas in physics. But still, I didn't really see calculus until my senior year. Now, when I went off to Caltech, most of my friends there were students that had come from very wealthy, well-to-do private schools. A lot of them scored a perfect score on the SAT the first time when they were in junior high school. Many of them had taken at least 2 years worth of college credit at the local colleges when they were in high school. So in some sense, I kind of felt that I came in a little bit behind, but I never really let that bother me. I placed into honors calculus at Caltech. That class actually doesn't exist anymore. I was actually one of the last students that took that class. And in this class, it was a very select number of students at Caltech, which is already very select in itself. But I was taking calculus there with other students who had gotten perfect scores in the SAT, had taken several years worth of calculus already, and I was doing just as well as they were. One of the things that the teacher for this class would do is if you scored high enough on the homework assignments, you wouldn't have to take the final exam. And I was very happy in that I never had to take an exam in that class. I always scored high enough in the assignments that I did not have to take any of the exams. Now, that being said, I still needed help from my old high school teacher, Michael Seminoff, on how to do some of the problems. And I would call him from time to time because really making that transition from high school to college is something that I certainly needed help with there in my first year. But it was definitely a confidence booster knowing that here I was around these students that were doing incredibly well, who had done incredibly well before they got to Caltech, and I was doing just as well as they were. Now, in addition to all of this, I learned that the mathematics department had a couple of prizes that they would give out every year. They gave out one prize to the students that were freshmen and sophomores, and they gave out another prize to the juniors and seniors. Now, this prize that I'm mentioning, really either one of these, was based on the research that students would do. So it wasn't for the grades that you got or how well you did on various exams. It was really for the research that you were doing. Now, I didn't really know what research was before I got to Caltech. But when I got there, I made it a point to read a lot of books. I was always in the library just reading books from the late 1800s, just mathematics, just learning about very different ideas, different techniques. And I decided to write up some ideas that I had in a paper, and I sent it off to the math department, and I won one of these prizes at the end of my freshman year. Well, I soon realized that I fell in love with mathematics. And again, I didn't really want to tell people because I was supposed to be a physicist, but I learned that I was really, really good at this whole research thing. So I had one good friend, he actually is Native American, and at the time, remember, I was very much into trying to support the students of color that we had there on campus. Now, this friend was actually double majoring in math and physics. So I told him, I know for a fact I'm going to win this prize a second time. So if you want to put your name on the paper with me, we'll win it together. Then this way we can say that there really are only like 2 Black students majoring in mathematics on campus. He was only one of 3 Native American students on campus. So I figured he and I could be 2 students of color and we could just win this prize together. Plus it had a financial prize to go along with it as well. And I figured that he just might want the money. So it's a running joke that he and I even have to this day, that I submitted the paper based on work that I had done, and the 2 of us won the prize. And there I won it for the second time. But I was really happy to say that now Caltech in its history can actually say that that year, the sophomores that won that prize, one was Black, one was Native American. And it was for the research that the two of us had done.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Mhm.
Let us now fast forward to Stanford. You know, you come into Stanford to do your PhD. What was the experience like at Stanford? Was it similar to Caltech or was it a bit different? Were there any sort of hurdles you encountered as a result of your skin color? And if so, what steps can be taken at Stanford or any other university to encourage diversity in mathematics?
Stanford was different in every way from Caltech, in every single way. Caltech at the time had about 800 undergraduates, maybe another 1,000 graduate students. Stanford, I think, had somewhere around 20,000 students. The mathematics department at Caltech had maybe 8 faculty or so. There were less than 10 of us as undergraduates that were majoring in mathematics. It had, I believe, another maybe 30 or so graduate students in math. The Stanford math department had somewhere around maybe 30 or so faculty members. There were another maybe 50 or so graduate students, so it was a slightly larger department. But also Caltech is an institute of technology, where Stanford is a university. Everything at Caltech is about STEM. It didn't matter which classes you took. It could have been chemistry, biology, physics, engineering. Everyone's going to take the same standard classes. Everybody knows differential equations. Everybody knows some physics somewhere. Everybody knows how to do quantum mechanics in their chemistry classes. That was just par for the course when you're there at Caltech. Stanford, I actually chose on purpose because I wanted to go to a university. I actually decided to not spend a lot of time in the math department at Stanford because I figured there's women's studies and there are the humanities. There is a law school, there's a medical school, there's a business school. I wanted to know what the entire college experience was all about. And I made it a point to have friends in every single school on campus. Didn't matter if it was School of Engineering, School of Humanities, every single school, I knew someone. And I think that it's fair to say I knew every Black professor on campus in the time I was there, and I probably knew every Black PhD student that was on campus. So I fell in love with the place. But again, I wanted to go to a place that was going to be drastically different in every way. A slightly larger place, a place where I could meet people in every single department, really just get the whole experience. At the time, I decided to live in what was called the Multicultural Theme House. And this is a graduate residence in the Raines houses that really focuses on having programs for multicultural communities. We made it a point to put on programs every single week out of the year. And this could have been as simple as having a tea tasting, a coffee tasting event where people would learn about coffees from all over the world, to having speakers to come by and talk about a book that they've written, or even just to have a conversation on maybe like an uncomfortable topic that all of us still wanted to learn more about. So I loved being in the Multicultural Theme House. But again, that was part of the decision to go to a place that was going to have much more of that college experience. The one thing that I did know about the math department, and I think that this isn't true just for Stanford, I think that this is true for a lot of places, is Stanford had admitted various Black students into their PhD program over the years, but almost none had graduated. When I got there, I knew of only one other African American who had his PhD from the math department, and that was Bill Massey. I think that he got his degree in the early 80s, maybe 1981 or so. And then, of course, I started in 1994. I believe that there's only been one other person, a third African American, to get his PhD in between us, between roughly 1981 and 1999. I don't know who that is, but Bill Massey has told me that there was a third person who got his degree. But still, my understanding is that Stanford has had many Black students that have come into the PhD program, but they haven't finished. So, of course, I've always been a little bit nervous about the reasons why that might have been true. Some of this might just be that Stanford is a very rigorous department and it's just a very difficult program for any student to go through. I can tell you that there were 12 of us that started in 1994, and I believe 6 of those individuals did not graduate, that they dropped out. I can also tell you that Stanford has not had any Black faculty, so I think that that actually matters a lot when it comes to issues of mentoring, I certainly didn't know about different conferences, different events that happen. For example, there's something called the Conference for African American Researchers in the Mathematical Sciences. This is a big conference that takes place every year for Blacks that are in mathematics. It could be for undergraduates, graduates, or even for faculty. It turned out that one of Stanford's own PhDs, Bill Massey, was the originator there at the conference. And the first year that conference took place was in 1995, just across the bay over in Berkeley. I knew nothing about this conference. That was my second year of grad school. I hadn't heard about it. I didn't know who Bill Massey was. I didn't know anything about this. I think if Stanford had a Black professor, I would have known about it and I would have tapped into the Black math community a little bit earlier. So there are different things that I do worry about when it comes to making sure that Black students will make it at Stanford. I can tell you that one program I was involved with that helped the undergraduates was, I'm not going to remember the exact name of this. I want to say Partners in Academic Excellence, but this was one of these mentoring programs where we matched up Black freshmen with the Black PhD students. And even to this day, I'm still friends with the 3 Black women that I had as my mentees the first year that we had the program in place. That I think was wonderful for 2 different reasons. One, of course, it helped the Black undergraduates to have mentors all over campus. But 2, for someone like me, it helped me to be a little bit more tapped into what the undergraduate experience was all about. And it's something that I would not have known if it weren't a part of this program here. So I think that there's things that Stanford did that made things better for me. But of course, I made the decision to be more involved with these different activities on campus. I would love to see the math department do a little bit more in terms of maybe bringing in more Black students, making sure that these students graduate, and of course, also to do its best in hiring Black faculty.
Yeah, well, you bring up some really good points there. And now I want us to discuss about a blog you wrote titled why I'm leaving a Research One university for a liberal arts college. You mentioned that you didn't like working at research universities and that you left the institution to attend one that was primarily focused on undergraduate teaching. What was this experience like, and what prompted you to make this bold move?
Well, when I finished from Stanford, I knew that I wanted to stay in academia. It was never a question about whether I wanted to be a college professor. I made the decision at the time in 1999 that I wanted to focus primarily on research. And there I traveled all over the world, having various research positions where I would get to learn about things, get to meet people, see how various universities worked. And of course, then I landed at Purdue in 2004. So about 5 years after I got my PhD. I thought at the time that I just wanted to focus on research, but then I slowly came to the realization that doing research alone is a very selfish pursuit. You know, you're focusing on esoteric problems that only a handful of people on the planet will ever care about. And I started to think more about the Black mathematical community, not just what's happening at the research level or at the faculty level, but also what's happening at the undergraduate level. I started to run some summer programs at Purdue so that I could really try to bring more Black undergraduates into the mathematics community. Every year I tried very difficult to find any Black undergraduates at Purdue who were interested in doing research. Now, Purdue has roughly 40,000 students, and it's a big engineering school, so you might think that it's not a problem at all to find Black students that are interested in mathematics. Well, most of the Black students at Purdue are actually interested in engineering, and it was very difficult for me to find any Black students interested in math. I can tell you, in the 14 years I was there, I probably knew 2 Black students who majored in mathematics, 2. And any given year, I could teach upwards of 100, 150 students in my classes. So it was a very depressing thing that I couldn't find any Black students at all that were interested in doing math. I eventually did find some students for the graduate program who would come in and work with me. But I was very much concerned with the pipeline issue. You know, I certainly felt that I couldn't complain about not finding enough graduate students to get their PhDs if I myself weren't training undergraduates to decide to go off to graduate school. And again, because I couldn't find any undergraduates at Purdue, I started to think very seriously whether I was being effective in what I wanted to do in establishing this community. So I did start to think very early on, maybe this whole research thing is not working. Maybe I needed to go to a place where I could work with undergraduates, where I could really encourage them to go into STEM, and more specifically, whether I could encourage them to do mathematics as a career. So it really just became a no-brainer at one point that if I really am serious about changing the face of mathematics and doing what I could to have more African Americans in the math community, then I would have to do something drastic. And that's when I really made the decision it was time for me to go. It was time for me to go to a liberal arts school where I would meet more Black undergraduates, where I could help to mentor them and to train them, and I could use my expertise of what it meant to be the research one to get a PhD in math, and then bring that here to a liberal arts school.
Wow. Yeah. And continuing on, in a 2019 New York Times article titled "What I Learned While Reporting on the Dearth of Black Mathematicians" by Amy Harmon, she states that there are a little under 1,800 tenured mathematicians at major math departments, and approximately 13 of those are African Americans. What do you make of these figures? What factors contribute to such stark disparities?
Well, I think that unfortunately it's a lot of different factors. It's sort of like this is a moving target that's really hard to really get your hands on to figure out what to do. There are roughly 200 schools in the country that have PhD programs. It's the PhD programs in the mathematical sciences. And if you try your best to break that down and just look at the top 50 schools, this is where Amy's article says that there are roughly only 13 African Americans that teach at these schools. Now, when I say the top 50, you can think about places like Stanford, like Berkeley, like Harvard, Princeton, Yale. And of those, they have no Black faculty. You know, if you really think about it, you have a place like Stanford University, who right now is considered to be one of the top 3 mathematics departments in the world. They don't have any Black faculty. I don't think that they've ever had any Black faculty. I know that you can make the argument that there are different levels in which you have faculty. You have the tenured faculty, you have lecturers, you have postdoctoral fellows. I do know that Stanford has at least had one postdoctoral fellow over the years. But this still goes back to what I was saying earlier, that if you wanted to really change the situation to have a pipeline, you need to have permanent Black faculty that are doing what they can to make sure that the graduate students are making it through the program. I can even say for myself, I certainly would have benefited from having a Black faculty member in the department. And it's still very upsetting, even now, that I didn't even know about the community of Black mathematicians, even considering that one of the key figures in this community himself is a Stanford graduate. Now, I think when it comes to factors of why there's only roughly 13 out of 2,000 faculty at all of these schools, it's a lot of different things. One, you could argue, how do people get jobs at these places? Now, I know that a place like Stanford always wants to say, well, we're always looking for the best and the brightest. We only want just the top individuals. But now here's where the argument becomes circular. Because if you want someone that you, quote unquote, think is top, that typically means you want someone that has a very good pedigree. So you want to look at where did they get their PhD, or even where were they a postdoctoral fellow? Really, where did they get their training? Well, now take a look at how many students you have that are getting their PhDs at these top places, like the Harvards, the Princetons, and the Yale. Well, Stanford has only ever had 3 Black PhDs. You take a look at a place like, say, Yale. I think Yale has had maybe 2. A place like Harvard, I don't think Harvard has ever had any Black PhDs. So now if you limit yourself by saying, we only want those who are the quote unquote best, that means you're looking at their pedigree, but then even your own departments are not doing anything about training anyone that can meet those standards. You can then take a look at the question of whether someone would even want to come work for your department. So this is a question that I think very few people really want to think about, but you can ask it in the following way. Let's say that you do make it through all of these incredibly high standards. Let's say that you are a brand new Black PhD, and now you're looking to go to a place like a Stanford or Princeton or Harvard. Well, the question is, why would you go? So you could ask yourself, well, you could be at a place like Stanford, but you'll have no other Black colleagues. You probably won't have any other Black students to mentor. You'll feel very much isolated from the community that you know. Now, this is one of the things that I experienced when I was there at Purdue. So now you have to ask, do you really feel like that this is how you want to live the rest of your career? Feeling isolated, feeling like you're the only one. There's other issues to worry about, such as the city that you're going to live in. A lot of the places that you have here that are considered to be the top, they're in cities that are less than ideal. Let's say, for example, I lived in West Lafayette, Indiana for 14 years, really 15 years out of my career. Indiana is known to be the birthplace, really the rebirth, the place of rebirth for the Ku Klux Klan back in the early 1900s. And I can tell you, every day I was there in Indiana, you would see a Confederate flag. It didn't matter if it was on the cars that were driving by or anyone that you would see there in the state, if you're just like going to the store or what have you. But it's a very uncomfortable place for a Black man to live. So now you have the question, regardless of the department, regardless of how you might feel about being isolated, there's the city that you live in. And so now the question is this where you want to live? Not where you want to work, but where you want to live. So again, there's lots and lots of factors, and there's really no one easy answer to say that this is something that you can do to fix. I will say that I think that one of the key places that you can start to get things to work out is you have to rethink, departments need to rethink, what do they consider to be factors to be a really important faculty member? What I mean by that is, I look at here, I'm working in the Claremont colleges, and there are 5 schools that are here as part of the consortium. Pomona College is one, but Harvey Mudd College is another. Harvey Mudd is very much like Pomona, that it's a very small school, it doesn't have a PhD program. But now, Harvey Mudd has more Black faculty in mathematics than any other department in the country outside of HBCUs. They have 3 Black faculty in their department. That is completely unheard of every other place that I've seen. The way that they've done this is the department itself had to ask the question, what factors was it willing to entertain to hire their faculty? They realized that they weren't going to use the traditional factors of saying, well, they want someone who does stellar research. They want someone who has a really great pedigree. But instead they asked the question, who's going to be there to mentor our students? Who's going to be there to encourage our students to go on and be better members of society? Who are the really good teachers? Who are the really good mentors? And I can tell you that if you look at a place like Harvey Mudd, I think that they have one of the most incredible departments in the country. Regardless of who the color of the faculty that they have there, this is looking at how they mentor the students, how many students go off to get the National Science Foundation graduate fellowships, how many of them go off and do these RUs in the summer. They're just doing an incredible job. But I think that that's because they had to rethink, what did it mean to be a really good faculty member in their department?
Okay, so I want to pick your brain on this point that same article touched on. So in that New York Times article, Amy stated that some folks think that African Americans have lower IQs, which lead less of them to pursue math, which is commonly thought of as requiring raw intellectual prowess. She pointed out that that such notions feed into pernicious biases, which serve as obstacles for African Americans who are mathematically gifted or who have potential in this area. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, unfortunately, mathematics in the American culture, I don't know how the rest of the world views it, but I'll say in the American culture, is considered to be one of the most intellectually challenging professions that you can go into. If you really think about it, whenever anyone is on an airplane, in a restaurant, and someone says, so what do you do? Then we come back and say, well, I'm a mathematician. The first thing people say is, oh, I was never good at math. You must be really smart. But you can flip that around, and let's say if I were to say, my profession is I'm an English professor. It would be embarrassing for someone to say, oh, English, you must be really smart. English is really hard. It's one of these things where we take mathematics and we place it on such a high pedestal that now it becomes a very difficult profession to go into. I think just placing it on a pedestal is what convinces a lot of students to stay away from it, and it convinces a lot of adults to just shy away from doing mathematics altogether. Now, Combine that with the way that American culture was founded. This idea that Black Americans are three-fifths of a person, that they are chattel slavery, that they are property, that they cannot possibly be intelligent enough to either be human, to learn how to read, and definitely not create their own type of science and mathematics. So you now have two opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to intellectual capabilities. You have those who do mathematics that are considered to be at the very top, and then you have African Americans, which by the very nature of this country and how it was founded, are considered to be at the very bottom. So there is a very serious dichotomy, intellectual discord, if you will, when it comes to Black Americans doing mathematics. I don't know if a lot of people are willing to actually face that. And when I say people, I mean those of us that are in the mathematical community, that this is contradictory in its very nature. Black Americans doing mathematics. I think this is what causes a lot of individuals in math, I'm going to say Black and white alike, who then see Black mathematicians and instantly think they couldn't possibly be as good as, or they couldn't possibly create their own mathematics. Or that if we do want to have someone go off to graduate school, we need to have bridge programs. We need to start them at a lower level. We need to be a little bit careful that they're not going to be scared away from all of this. I think one of the things I've learned in being a math professor at Purdue is it is very easy for a lot of people to want to help you and support you when you're just starting out in the profession, when you're an undergraduate, when you're a graduate student. There, you're not considered to be an equal. You're considered to be someone lower than that they can help out and assist. When you get to be older and raise up through the ranks so that now you're a professor, now you have your own students, you're still never considered to be on the same level. I can tell you that I've had a lot of people that like to tell me, well, I'm your mentor. I have mentored you over the years. And to me, it's actually the opposite. They are my mentees because of the work that I've had to do to help them and assist them. That is teaching them about different programs that are out there, showing them what does it mean to run a research program for undergraduates, showing them how to run a conference, how to handle having a postdoc. These are things that I've done, but still I can tell you that a lot of my colleagues will tell me, yeah, but I still have mentored you over the years. It's still part of this dichotomy of that you're still not considered to be at the top, that you maybe at best are somewhere in the middle. So I think that it's a very serious issue that the mathematics community needs to come to grips with, but it's very difficult, I think, for the math community to actually understand that this is a very serious issue. There's still a lot of people out there that feel in order to do mathematics, you have to be brilliant, that it is a young person's game, that you peak doing mathematics when you're in your 40s, that you have to be in your 20s and come up with something brilliant. All the great mathematics is done when you're in your 20s and in your 30s. These are things that everyone in the mathematics community says, but no one's really willing to ask, wait, is some of this wrong? Does any of this make any sense? For example, you can take a look at what's called the Nobel Prize. This is considered nowadays to be the Nobel Prize in mathematics. All of the winners, at least over the last 10 years or so, that have gotten the prize are all later in their career. They're in their 60s and 70s, and some of them even in their 80s. I think that if more and more people start to think very seriously about the stereotypes that the mathematics community has, then we can start to break down some of these barriers. But there are some stereotypes that really, really do run deep in the math community.
And speaking a bit about some of the disrespect that you said you received from your peers, in a separate, in a different New York Times 2019 article written by Amy Harmon titled "For a Black Mathematician, What It's Like to Be the Only One." In that article, she mentions that you received a lot of unspoken disrespect during your time at Purdue. She talked about one incident that caught my attention about students at the math department being warned by a white professor not to work with you. Could you elaborate on this experience more?
Yeah, well, some of this comes from a third-hand story that I did hear from one of the students at Purdue. That I know that as a lot of departments go, that faculty members oftentimes like to socialize with their students. This could be either over lunch, over dinner, at the bar, what have you. And a lot of times when you have younger graduate students who want to learn more about the culture of a department, they just want to ask random questions. Well, who's a really good person at teaching this class? Is there a professor that I should be worried about? Who might be a really good advisor to have? Well, my understanding as the story goes here is that there was some social outlet where several of the students were asking one professor in particular, who might I think about working with? Because I'm thinking about working in the area that Professor Goins works in. And I think that I might want to work with him. So my understanding is that this professor said, well, no, you should really think about working with some of these other professors. I think what was upsetting for me to hear about all of that is at one point, I had as many graduate students in number theory as the other faculty combined, which meant that I certainly had a reputation as being a really good advisor, one that was very caring, a really good teacher, one that was very good at the chalkboard. But still, to know that one of my colleagues was actively telling students to work with other faculty really did feel undermined. Now, again, I wouldn't have an issue if any professor says, well, there's a lot of really good faculty, you can think about who to work with. I even do this myself with my own students. And sometimes I'll even tell a student, well, maybe you and I could work together, but it sounds like you personally have an interest in working in this area. I think that this professor here would be much better suited to your needs. You're more than happy to sit here in my office and we can chat from time to time, but it just sounds like that this other person might be better suited. So I do know that this is a third-hand story and that I wasn't there, so I can't say exactly what happened. But I certainly have been in situations where it was very clear that the faculty that I was working with, the faculty that were my colleagues, brazenly had disrespect for the work that I was doing, for really the expertise that I had. I can tell you that there were seminars that I gave at Purdue where faculty, my own colleagues in the room, would call me out saying that, no, that result is wrong. And I'm quoting a result that is a standard result in a textbook. And I've had faculty in the same room that will say, no, that is a standard result. I can show you in a book when the guy's done with his presentation. I've had other people that when I've said something, acting as the expert in the room, they've ignored, even though I'm standing in front of the room giving this comment, and talk to other people in the room about that same result. Just completely brazenly ignore me, even though I'm there in the front of the room. I certainly have had students that have been very disrespectful and not really caring about, say, what I have to say, about what I'm doing, like nasty emails sometimes about things. So a lot of this is, I don't really want to use the word microaggressions because I think that they're a little bit more macro than micro. But certainly, very aggressive behavior and saying, I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I really am going to push, I really am going to question, I really am going to probe whether you really do know what you're talking about. I can give you one kind of quick, funny anecdote. There certainly were times at Purdue where I was questioned by white students in the classroom, who really wanted to push back on whether or not I knew the material. The funny thing is, coming from a place like CalTech, you're seeing material at a very high level. And you're seeing it done by the researchers that are at the top of their fields. Not people that are somewhat the best, but people who are like inventing the material while they're there teaching it to you. So I oftentimes would hold back when I was teaching classes at Purdue because I figured, that they're undergraduates. I just want to kind of introduce them to the ideas. I remember one day in particular, someone asked me a question. I'm not going to remember all the details, but it was like in a differential equations class. So I figured if this kid really is going to push me on whether I know the material, fine, let's go at it. So I gave him a detailed answer using the high-level research of what was happening in the differential equations. And I gave him like a 5-minute response. I'm like, no, this is actually exactly what's happening. And of course, the student was dead quiet, never said anything for the rest of the semester. But, but it was things like that would happen all the time. And at some point, sadly, you internalize them. You just figure this is the way it's going to be. This is just par for the course. Every seminar you're going to give, you're going to get questioned. Every classroom you're going to walk into, you're going to get, you're going to have students that will try their best to challenge you. And I don't think that that's really any way for any professor to live. Definitely not a black professor. But I hate to say it, but this happens all the time.
Given the lack of representation in mathematics, what
Mhm.
do you think caused the American Mathematical Society, which for our audience is a professional association for research mathematicians, to reject a proposal which addresses the scarcity of Black and Hispanic members in the math community?
So I have to think about back to the article exactly what Amy was referring to there. I know in the 1970s, and this might have been what the article was referring to, because I don't know if there's been anything more recently, but in the 1970s, there was a big push by various Black and Brown mathematicians to have the American Mathematical Society more or less say there's a lot of racism happening amongst the members of the AMS, and there's a lot of issues happening in general around being Black in mathematics. Now, at the time, there were issues such as it was very difficult for a lot of Black faculty to be able to go to hotels where the conferences were. There were issues where various clerks and secretaries would sometimes refuse to give Black mathematicians tickets to banquets. Or there might have been racist issues where Blacks found it really difficult to get into elected positions as part of the American Mathematical Society. So I know that there was a big push at one point to state this is a serious problem. And the American Mathematical Society needs to take a stand to say to its members, this cannot continue, this must change. That proposal was shot down by the AMS membership. There was a vote given out to, I forget, all 3,000 members or so. And at the time, in the early 1970s, just that proposal is saying by the AMS, this can no longer stand, that this has to change. The AMS membership voted to shoot that down, that they thought such a resolution, such a statement was too much at the time. I know that nowadays, this is within the last few weeks or so, there's been a similar push due to the recent protests with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter to now say with the American Mathematical Society, things need to change. The AMS needs to first recognize that it has had a very racist history, that there have been these issues in the past. And number two, that the AMS should do something about changing this, making sure that this doesn't happen again. The AMS did come out with a statement maybe about 2 weeks ago or so, saying that these things are going to change. And one of the key things that they've done is establish a fellowship for Black mathematicians. The details of this are totally unclear, but this fellowship is supposed to, my understanding is, help to promote the works and the careers of Blacks in the mathematical sciences. So again, the details have not been worked out yet, but this is a major thing that's just been announced in the last 2 weeks or so. So I certainly do have faith that the American Mathematical Society is changing. I do know that it's a different question about the membership of the AMS and how things will change there. But I think in terms of the leadership of the AMS, things are getting a little bit better these days.
Good. Um, what jewels of advice do you have for younger generations of Black Americans who hope to walk in your footsteps one day?
The first thing I would say to do is try your best to find a love of doing mathematics. The unfortunate thing about math is where most students see math for the first time is in the classroom. And unfortunately, not a lot of people who teach mathematics are good at teaching mathematics. So I think that you have a lot of students who are really, really good at math, but they dislike math because of what they see in the classroom. There are, however, ways in which you can learn more about math and its culture that don't involve the classroom. So I would recommend for anyone listening to please try to work with faculty outside of the classroom. If there's a really cool math professor that you know of, sit down in that person's office and just ask a whole bunch of random questions. So I personally love it when a random student will just walk in and just say something like, so what does a mathematician do? Or I heard about this thing called Fermat's theorem on TV yesterday, what is it? Or like in the Avengers, I heard that if you wanted to time travel, you have to learn about eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Like just these totally random things. And I'm more than happy to either go to the chalkboard or sit here at my desk and talk about them. Also, I think that students can learn more about what a mathematician does, not just by talking to the professors, by doing some of these undergraduate research programs. These are called RUs, or research experiences for undergraduates. So certainly, if anyone can do any of these programs, then you learn more about math research, and that will help you learn more about the math culture and about the math community. But mainly what I'll say is try your best to learn about math outside of the classroom. The classroom, I think, is a bad place to learn because there are so many people that are not good at teaching. But there are a lot of people that are really good at motivating math and really encouraging people to go into math. From there, hopefully, you can find a mentor, you can find someone that will really encourage you to do mathematics. But the main thing is definitely just try to find that one professor who you can just ask a whole bunch of random questions. Not someone who's going to teach you a class, but just someone that you can just sit down and just talk about mathematics with.
Professor Goins, what do you want to be known for? What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Honestly, I want to be that crazy old professor at Pomona College that whenever any Black student comes his way, they know that this crazy professor is going to say, you need to major in mathematics. My whole thing is I'm going to try to convince every Black student at Pomona College to major in math. Right? I really love doing math. I love the Black students that are here in Pomona. So I'm going to find a way to merge the two. But that's what I would love to be known for. That crazy guy that's just convincing everybody be a math major.
Thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it. This is very insightful, and I think that it'll just help a lot of math departments and just individuals out there that are curious about STEM, mathematics, to just I guess kind of know what they're going into. And we have you as an example, and they will know exactly what to expect and how to navigate that field better. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. This has been a lot of fun.